Good morning, everyone. I'm Jen Meyer with Parmele Law Firm, and we are so excited to be with you today for our very first Parmele Live Facebook event. Today's guest is James Pavisian from our Topeka, Kansas office. He's an attorney that's been with us for 13 years and is our leading representation for Veteran Services. Veterans Affairs, which encompasses compensation and pension benefits. So thanks for being with us today.
Hey, no problem, Jen. Thanks for having me.
We are so excited for this opportunity. Thank you to all of our people who are visiting online and joining us for this discussion. Today we're going to be talking about the PACT Act, and this affects Vietnam era veterans as well as veterans from the Gulf War. And James, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the PACT Act?
Yeah, the PACT Act, quite honestly, is probably the most important and most comprehensive toxic exposure bill that's been passed by Congress. And I would say 2-3 decades. It has been a very, very difficult process to get it passed. There's been some people who are true believers in taking care of our veterans when they get home, working really hard behind the scenes. One person that I know has been publicly named to really be important in passing this act is Jon Stewart, actually. A lot of us know him from his comedy days on The Daily Show, but Jon Stewart is one of the most prevalent figures right now in the nation, fighting not only for veterans but also first responders when it came to 9/11. So him, a lot of veteran organizations, NOVA, which is what we're part of at Parmele, they worked with Congress, Senator Moran, and Senator Tester. So Moran's out of Kansas, Tester, a Democrat out of Montana, sponsored the bill in the Senate. There's been some people on the House side that sponsored it. And essentially what it's done is it expanded coverage for healthcare issues that both Gulf War veterans suffer, coming back from the Gulf War due to burn pit exposure, as well as Vietnam veterans, expanding presumptions and locations for Agent Orange exposure.
Okay, so you mentioned the word toxic exposure. Can you tell me what that is?
Yeah, it's easiest one the way I can kind of easily tell you all about it is, I'm sure all of us growing up or even now saw those commercials on TV like mesothelioma or asbestos, things that all these attorneys online or actually now by TV are talking about. That's toxic exposure. So think of any chemical man-made that has harmful effects to the human body that maybe someone would have been exposed to. Plumbers are exposed to asbestos sometimes, construction workers as well. For veterans, it's a lot of things like jet fuel. That's why you see all the Camp Lejeune stuff. That's toxic exposure in its own way. But with burn pit exposure, we're talking about a lot of deadly chemicals that are in computers. And what we found out and what people have been complaining about for many years now is, in the Gulf War at least, they built these giant pits next to where people slept, threw everything you can imagine, whether it's bodies, bullets, computers, sensitive information, and just burned it. And what it caused was all this smoke that contains all these harmful chemicals to go into people's lungs and cause some very long-lasting and serious health issues.
Wow, I had no idea about that. Thanks so much for explaining that. Can you also tell me, we'll use a real life example. My dad was in Saudi Arabia in the early mid-90s. What should he do now?
Yeah, first of all, thank you to your dad for serving in Saudi Arabia, and I know you have other family members that have served or continue to serve. The first thing you need to do is, I would say, call or contact a veteran's attorney or your local veteran service officer. So it's not just us attorneys that do this work. One of the first lines of defense is the veteran service organization groups. Those are like the DAV, VFW. There's different organizations in different states. Like in Missouri, we have the Missouri Veterans Commission. Kansas has a similar one. And essentially what you want to do is talk to them and see if you're eligible. The way that you would know is if you have a health issue and you were serving in the Gulf War, or, again, the PACT Act did also expand Agent Orange exposure. If you've been denied in the past because the VA or the military said, hey, you weren't exposed to Agent Orange, but you were, and you were in that area, so Thailand, you talk about areas of Vietnam, the different waters and boundary waters. Contact an attorney or VSO to see if this new act has expanded coverage enough where you're not eligible.
So once the veteran contacts us, then what does that process look like?
Yeah, so I think everyone's a little bit different. What we do at Parmele is we'll have an initial conversation with you just to determine whether eligibility is even possible. One of the things that I pride myself on is I don't like wasting people's time. Your time as a veteran and as a member of our society is very important. I'll never lie to you or lead you down a path where I think there's not really a chance. So what we do is we do an initial assessment. If I feel like there's a case there, I'll tell you that. And then what happens is I'll do a deep dive into the claim file. Every veteran that's applied or will apply, the VA creates a claim file that has all your service treatment records, military personnel records, if you have prior claims, what those claims were and the results. And I'll go deep dive into it, summarize the whole thing, and figure out not only are you eligible for PACT Act claims, but is there other claims you're eligible for that you haven't thought about, or is there a potential for an increase on the claims that you are currently service connected for?
So your disability percentage, how does that play into it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So disability percentages can go from 0 to 100. Now, there's some possibilities of going over 100%. I know that sounds crazy, but it's possible. Those are very rare. We're talking about conditions where you're either losing multiple limbs or loss of use of a limb. There's certain additional benefits above 100% if you have erectile dysfunction due to the impairments you're dealing with. But overall, you get a rating from 0 to 100%. 0 is obviously the least. The 100% is the most. And if you're at 100%, generally, that's kind of the most you can get. Adding new conditions may not be worth it unless you're trying to build it up for death benefits.
Okay, and presumptive conditions. Tell us what that is.
Yeah, so with the VA, there's usually two main issues that you have to convince the VA of. Number one, that you have a current injury. So let's assume, using the PACT Act, let's say you have lung cancer now. That's usually not very hard. VA will almost always acknowledge you have a current problem. The hard part is trying to convince the VA that the current problem, again in our example, lung cancer, is connected to something that happened in service. Before the PACT Act, the VA would almost always tell veterans, look, I'm sorry you have lung cancer, but there's nothing we did in service to cause your lung cancer now after service. So when we say presumption, what that means is by law, Congress has told the VA there's certain conditions that you automatically have to assume that you caused because of certain exposures. So in our PACT Act example, lung cancer is one of those conditions now that is presumed. So if you are a Gulf War veteran and you were exposed to burn pit exposure, if you currently have lung cancer, even if that lung cancer was diagnosed 2 decades, or now we're coming up 3 decades after your service, the VA will still assume that no matter what's happened in those 30 years, that they're the ones that caused it and they will service connect it, no questions asked.
Wow, that is amazing. That is just so great for all of our veterans who've served us, and one less thing for them to have to be concerned about or worry about having to prove.
Yeah, I mean, before the PACT Act, that was the issue. There was a lot of veterans, just kind of take a step back, before the PACT Act was passed, the VA did acknowledge 3 conditions that they said, okay, if you have burn pit exposure, we'll give it to you. Asthma, basically chronic sinus infections, and then allergies. But it was, even then, it was difficult because the asthma, you had to prove that the asthma came into existence within 10 years after your discharge. So there's veterans before the PACT Act that would have asthma, serious asthma, and they wouldn't be able to get benefits because the VA said, hey, your asthma was diagnosed 10 years and 1 day after, or 11 years after your service. The nice thing about the PACT Act is it said no, at any point after you have been, after your service, if you've been diagnosed with a whole list of these conditions, you're going to be presumed to have compensation for it.
That is so great. So let's talk about a favorable decision. First of all, what does a favorable decision mean?
Yeah, we at Parmele do both Social Security, disability, and VA compensation. And a favorable decision is different for both. Social Security is an all or nothing proposition. You either get your disability for Social Security or you don't. It's 0 or 100%. For VA, a favorable decision can look different. So we talked about those ratings, that 0 to 100%. So we can maybe take a veteran from 60% to 80%. That veteran's going to get a different amount of money, a higher amount for that 80% compensation. And so that is a favorable decision, getting your rating from where it is to a little bit higher. Now the other thing too, though, is you get that 100% we were talking about. So someone who's at 100% may still want to file for claims under the PACT Act because even though your monthly benefit isn't going to change, one of the important things is to make sure your family's covered if something happens to you. So if you eventually die because of a condition you're service connected for, and you are at 100% disability, the VA will make sure to take care of your spouse and any children you have, depending on their age, if you're at 100% and you die from the thing that you got in service. So asthma may be one of those things, cardiovascular issues, cancers, obviously. Those are main ones that come up. But where I see this the most right now is Agent Orange exposure. Those Vietnam War vets, they're getting up there, 70s, some of them in their 80s. So we want to make sure they're protected because when they pass, we want to make sure their spouses have that coverage.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room, the financial aspect of this.
Yeah.
How does the process work? How is money awarded if there is a decision rendered favorable?
Yeah, I'll talk about it in both ways, both to the veteran and then also to us if we're representing that veteran. Honestly, one of the things we do Social Security, Disability, VA. The VA is actually, for all its faults, exceptionally good at making sure veterans get paid as fast as possible. When we get a favorable decision, it's not uncommon for the next check to be at that higher level, and that back pay to be paid within a month of the veteran being found at that higher level. And I think the reason for that is we all know, and everyone at the VA, no matter what anyone's interaction has been, I know there's a lot of negative interaction with the VA, but people there do truly want to help veterans. They recognize the sacrifice that you've all made to our country and to our way of life. So when there is money due to you, they try to get it out to you as soon as possible. For us as attorneys, we only get paid if we win. And when I said when we win is getting that higher rating. So if we go from 60 to 80%, every firm's a little bit different, but we all charge a percentage of that back pay. You'll see usually 20% at the lowest, at the highest around 33% or so. And that's paid by the government. So normally you don't have to write a check to us. If it's over 20%, you probably would, but overall it's a pretty seamless process.
Okay, that's great. We do have one question that has come in. How do I get in touch with Parmele Law Firm for assistance?
Yeah, so there's a phone number you can call, 417-616-2691 to reach us. We have a team of people that answer the phone that can schedule an appointment with me or Andrew, another attorney in our firm that specializes in VA and is certified. We'll do the initial consultation as we discussed earlier on this live feed, and then from there we just kind of go deeper into that process.
Okay, great. Also, we just want to let all of our online viewers know that you can always go to our website, which is parmelelawfirm.com, and there is a tab called Veteran Disability. You can click on that, and there is a myriad of information available to you on there. If you want to just chat with someone, if you want to send in a question before you make that initial phone call to discuss in person, you are more than welcome to do that. And hopefully any questions that you might have or information that you're looking for can be found there. So James, thanks so much for being with us today. Is there anything else about the PACT Act that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, just one other thing that's more prevalent for the spouses of Vietnam War veterans who have passed. One of the amazing things about the PACT Act that it did is that it has opened up an avenue for spouses of a veteran who was a Vietnam War veteran who has filed or was exposed to Agent Orange in certain areas to posthumously file for benefits and try to get basically what we call widow's benefits from the VA. So if you know a spouse of a veteran who's passed, a Vietnam War veteran, they too should be encouraged to contact an attorney or VSO to see what benefits they or their family may be entitled to, because unlike other conditions like for the Gulf War veterans, only they can file. But for Congress did the right thing here for the Vietnam War veterans, just because of how long it's been, where they can go posthumously file for that veteran and get some benefits as well.
Okay, great. We did have one other question come in. Are we working with any VSOs, or do they send people that may contact them to us, or should veterans just contact us?
Yeah, we're all a big community here. Anyone you talk to, whether it's an attorney or VSO, they'll tell you the same thing. There's a lot of veterans that need a lot of help. we can only handle so much. So VSOs are great to contact. We don't necessarily work hand in hand with them, but I refer cases to VSOs. They'll send them to us if it's higher on the process. The difference between us and VSOs mostly is VSOs are non-attorneys. That doesn't make them bad, it's just they're non-attorneys, so they can only go so far in the system. And we attorneys tend to go at the board and above. So if there's, VSO may take it to the board and then hand it off to an attorney to file the appeal to the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims.
Okay, great. Well, that is all that we have for today. Thank you again so much for coming in and being with us and sharing all this important information. Thank you to all of our online viewers. And again, if you have questions and you'd like to speak to someone in person, you can call us at 417-616-2691. And you can also visit parmelelawfirm.com and visit the Veterans Disability tab for more information. So thanks for joining us today, and we will see you again in 2023.